Shalom, family. You know, many people are now putting out videos showing the past and all of the atrocities that have happened to us and why now in 2019 we are demanding reparations. And, rightfully so. We really are entitled to it. It's not like we are asking for it and this country did not get any work out of us. They got a lot of free labor, and we're still getting ripped off in all kinds of ways, even now. So today we're going to talk about a variety of things, but all pertaining to law and everything that was set up after we walked off of the plantation. Now, as long as we were working for free, our forefathers, we were okay. But the moment we left the plantation and would not work unless we were getting paid, we became lazy. Okay. So I don't know how lazy slaves built a nation. That is the most laughable thing ever. But we are far from lazy people. There is no one more hardworking than Black men and women in this country. And that's a fact. It's a fact. Okay, just know when they call you lazy, there's an ulterior motive behind that. So don't even look at it as nothing. Just look at that equivalent to them telling you they got a high IQ. We know that's not true either. Okay, so let's talk about what happened to us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right, just let me know if you can see my screen. Please give me a 1, and then we can get started. Okay, great. And by the way, welcome back to some of y'all that left a few months ago and you decided to come back. I do notice, trust me, just like I noticed on the Hangout yesterday, there were some people that cropped up that left and now you're conveniently coming back. Welcome back. I'm not going to show any animosity towards you, but don't think that I don't know some of the things that were said about me. I know. And we will talk about that at another time. But today, this is what we are talking about. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further, let's go ahead and get into this. All right. Now, Virginia, back in the 1700s, created what we know today as the slave codes. Now, these folks will insist to us that these things are not being used anymore, but we know that's a lie. There are clear differences in how we get treated and how other people in this country get treated by cops, by the courts, by the prison system. There are clear differences, and there's no denying those differences either. We know. So it is no point in coming and denying and lying and all that stuff, because we do know about these different disparities. You got the just us laws, and you still got the Negro laws that are being carried out today. So in 1705, Virginia drafted a set of codes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are the only group of people in America that they made laws specifically for. This was not done to everybody in this country. And it's all the more reason why it is absolutely asinine for any politician to sit around and believe we need to create laws for everybody. We need to create policies for everybody. No, no, you don't. No, you don't. You need to do the right thing. And this is why America is going through a whole rash of judgment now. And you got a president that looks bad before the entire world, but he represents what America really truly is. All right, so the status of Blacks in Virginia slowly changed over the last half of century and 17th century. Black indentured servants. Now, when they first started the colonies, Black people were indentured servants. And of course, they were replaced with slaves. And when our forefathers became slaves, the intention was to keep us slaves forever. So in 1705, the Virginia General Assembly removed any lingering uncertainty about this terrible transformation. It made a declaration that would seal the fate of African Americans for generations to come, which is still impacting us to this day. Don't ever let them tell you slavery was a long time ago and we're not slaves. No, we may not be physical chattel slaves, but the effects of what they put in place back then still does impact us today. So that is also a lie when they say this. All right, so all servants imported and brought into the country who were not Christians in their native country, which they knew we weren't Christians. They knew we were the Hebrews and we were not Christians, shall be accounted and be slaves. So if you came into this country, which none of us were Christians, you were a slave. All Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves. So I want you to look at that. All Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves. All of these people in those times were considered Black. They were not seen as anything else. I know they, even mulattoes were, they may call them mulattoes, but they were out there picking cotton and doing the same things the other slaves were doing. Within this dominion shall be held be real estate. So we were considered real estate, y'all. We were property. If any slave resist his master correcting such a slave, and shall happen to be killed in such correction, the master shall be free of all punishment. Now, I want y'all to think about what happens today when the police officer kills us unarmed. What happens? Isn't it the same thing that happens to this day? They're not punished. It's deemed an accident. The cop is never guilty for killing us. See, ladies and gentlemen, they may not be telling you that they are carrying these laws out, but they still are. Just understand that they are carrying these laws out to this very day. This is why do you think your lawmakers will not make policies to stop these police officers from killing us unarmed? Because they already wrote laws that said if they happen to kill you, it's deemed an accident. It never happened. Okay? The code, which would also serve as a model for other colonies, went even further. The laws impose harsher physical punishment, since enslaved persons who did not own property could not be required to pay fines. It stated that slaves needed written permission to leave their plantation, that slaves found guilty of murder or rape would be hanged, that for robbing or any other major offense, the slave would receive 60 lashes and be placed in stocks, where his or her ears would be cut off, and that for minor offenses, such as associating with whites, slaves would be whipped, branded, or maimed. You can get taken into custody and beaten and even killed. And these cops will still be told they're not guilty. Doesn't this still happen? No matter what they do, they're not guilty. They wrote this shit into law centuries ago. Yes, they would cut off their ears. And if they got caught reading, y'all, they would gouge their eyes out. I mean, they did some sick shit. Okay. So for the 17th century, a slave in Virginia, disputes with a master could be brought before a court for judgment. With the slave codes of 1705, this no longer was the case. A slave owner who sought to break the most rebellious slaves could now do so. So they could rape you in front of everybody. You could get beaten or even killed or put to death in front of everybody. So they literally made it legal to torture and kill a slave. That's what they did. Knowing all punishment he inflicted, including death, would not result in the slightest reprimand. So they're saying they could beat, maim, kill, and do whatever they want to their slave and never be reprimanded. They wrote this shit into law. They wrote it into law. Now, maybe you will all understand why white citizens and cops never get punished, hardly ever get punished for what they do to us, because they wrote this into law back in the 1700s, and they're still carrying this shit out today, despite the fact that they're trying to convince us that they're not. They are. They never stop carrying out these laws. Their intention when they wrote this was to keep us under these Negro laws for the rest of our lives. Okay. So why did they even come up with these laws? Because they feared rebellion from the slaves. They know all this shit they do to us is wrong. And they're constantly fearing us to rise up against it. That is their biggest fear. And they're starting to see remnants of that today with ADOS. This is scaring them. But just understand, we can't lose in this whole thing, y'all. Even if they come out like Bernie Sanders and say, no, we don't lose. That's more judgment on these people. And if they say yes, then that's a blessing from our Heavenly Father. But we can't lose in this whole thing. Just understand that we're not on the losing team at the end of this whole thing. We are the winners, not the losers. Okay. So slave codes did not accept their fate without protest. many instances of rebellion were known to Americans. Even in colonial times, these rebellions were not confined to the South. So even in colonies up here in the North, there were slave rebellions. There were a lot of rebellions, y'all. We fought every step of the way. They make it seem like our ancestors were docile and scared and they just did what they told. That's not true. They literally fought every step of the way. There were constant uprisings. And there were even uprisings during World War I and II. There was a lot of infighting between the Black and the white soldiers. You know, they lock all of this history out. A lot of it has been locked out. Just like a lot of race riots happened that were never written into history. Because if it appears like they didn't get the upper hand, it didn't get written into history. All right. In fact, one of the earliest examples of a slave uprising was 1712 in Manhattan. As African Americans in the colony grew greater and greater in number, there was justifiable paranoia on the part of the white settlers that a violent rebellion could occur in one's own neighborhood. It was this fear of rebellion that led each colony to pass a series of laws restricting slave behaviors. The laws were known as slave codes. So that's why they were written in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. So, you know, again, you would not have to feel those kind of fears unless you know what you're doing is wrong. You already know it. Okay. In the courts, a slave accused of any crime against a white person was doomed. Now, what happens, y'all? If we commit a crime and white people were involved, then you are going to be in jail for decades. If that same crime was carried out on a Black person, they hardly do any time. And we see that even to this day. But see, this ball was set in motion a long time ago. No testimony could be made by a slave against a white person. What do they do to this day? I want y'all to really think about this. What do they do to this day? What happened during the Trayvon Martin trial? Right? They gave money to George Zimmerman. They helped George Zimmerman. They were defending George Zimmerman out here in public all hard. They were defending him all over every television outlet, right? Did anybody defend Trayvon Martin? Which news network defended Trayvon Martin? Which one? So you can clearly see everything you see out in the media. You can go back into these slave codes and see exactly where it all originated, right? And whenever Black men specifically go on trial in America, the Black man is never a liar. The Black man is always guilty. He's lying. He should be in jail, blah, blah, blah. We hear the same thing. Bill Cosby should be in jail. Everybody should be in jail, but you never hear them talk that same way about their own men that are in many cases doing far worse crimes. See, if you're never going to be punished for anything, then what reason would it be for you not to commit a crime? Okay, you wouldn't have any incentive not to commit the crime. Okay, so now they passed all of these codes, and they weren't just passed here. South America had their version, especially Brazil, had their version of slave codes in their country. All right, so now let's look at some of those codes. All right, give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay. All right, let's go over the US slave codes. These are just a few of them. US slave codes samples. Okay, so now we have no slave could testify in court except in a case involving another slave. It was illegal for a slaveholder to work slaves in the field on Sundays. Okay, remember, even to this day, what do? Go to church on Sunday. All right, except as punishment or unless they were paid. All right, so that's number one. Number two, number three, any slave who went away from his or her plantation had to have a pass. The slave had to show his pass to any white who wanted to see it. Do you know they were doing that over in South Africa during apartheid? All of the black citizens had to wear this ID badge around their neck, and any white person could check it. You can see these are the same people no matter where they are in the world. And this thing is global. That's why you see identical things happening even in different countries. Number four, a slave was freed only by a will drawn up by the master or by buying their freedom from their master. This was very expensive. What they would do is draw up wills and pass their slaves down to their sons and daughters when they died. And they just kept doing this for generations, passing the slave down. Five, slaves could not make any kind of contract, including marriage. So I guess they were going to sell you off anyway, so there was no need in getting married. Six, slaves were not allowed to have weapons. To this day, don't they still act like that? Like they don't want black people armed? You notice how the NRA never included the black community? Even to this day, they don't want us armed. Now, when they talk about gun laws, they're talking about them, not us. And to this day, when one of us gets shot, the NRA says absolutely nothing because they don't care about us. They don't want to include us. They never came to the black community in efforts to include us in the NRA. You can, like we said, we can judge you by your fruits. Plain and simple. Seven, it was illegal for more than a few slaves, five, to gather together away from home unless a white was present. Now, what do they do to this day when we group together and talk? What do? I know all of you experiences. There's not too many black people alive that have not experienced talking in a group with other black people, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, some white person comes walking up. See, I don't let them do that to me now that I'm hip to what they're doing. Usually, if I'm talking in a group with other black people, I make them feel uncomfortable or I leave. I don't continue talking when they come up. I stop talking or I will be so nasty to them that they'll turn around and leave. Okay. But yeah, now you see where that comes from. Whenever we're talking in a group, one of them have to always walk up to see what's going on. That comes from the slave codes. That's taught from them. Now, this is why I'm telling you, they're still carrying this stuff out to this day. No slave was allowed to preach except to slaves on his or her own plantation while in the presence of whites. That is nothing but paranoia. This is why, to this day, white people think they got the right to know what black people are doing at all times. It is not their right. But you can see where that comes from, that kind of thinking, where it comes from. It comes from the slave codes. And again, you can clearly see them carrying this stuff out to this day. Just them making phone calls to the cops on us, that's all part of the slave code. That's where it originated from. They think they got the right to oversee us. They think they got the right to know what we're doing, what we're saying. All right. Any slave caught stealing could be whipped. That's number 8. Number 9, it was illegal to teach slaves to read and write. It was illegal to give them books. Number 10, it was illegal to cruelly mistreat or kill a slave unless the slave resist. Now, what did the cops say to us to this day? I'm just showing y'all where all of the mess you see today come from. What do the cops always constantly say to us? Resisting arrest, resisting arrest. Well, and you hear other white people saying, well, they shouldn't have resisted. They should not have resisted. This is where it comes from. Stop resisting. Stop resisting. You see, this is where it comes from. That comes from the slave code. That's why they say it more to black people than anyone else because it comes out of the slave codes. Okay. Number 11, a child who had one slave parent and one free parent was free only if the free parent was the child's mother. So if the mother was enslaved and the father was free, the child would be considered property. Number 12, slaves could not own property, and some states could not own animals. 13, owners were required to feed and clothe their slaves properly and take care of their sick and old slaves. They actually used to kill many of the elderly slaves when they were unable to work. They would just kill them. They don't want to have to pay. They want to earn, not pay. 14, any African Americans who cannot prove they are free are considered slaves. Now, that wasn't necessarily true. I remember when my grandfather used to talk about slavery down south, because his own father, he was a sharecropper, and so was his father. Well, anyway, he said a lot of times those white folks, like when a free slave would show their paper, they would tear their paper up and tell them you're a slave. Okay, they would do that a lot. So they didn't always accept that paper. They're making you believe they did, they didn't. Many free slaves ended up back in slavery. 15. Most cities had laws controlling slave behavior in public. For example, in Charleston, South Carolina, slaves were not allowed to sweat. Now, just think about it. You know how hot it gets in South Carolina? Okay, I want you to picture how hot it gets in South Carolina. A slave was not allowed to sweat, smoke, or walk with a cane. These motherfuckers are crazy. Yes, it was illegal for you to even sweat. Now, how the hell are you going to do that back-breaking work out in the baking sun and you're not allowed to sweat? Boy, these people are really freaking demons. Yes, you were not allowed to sweat, smoke, or walk with a cane. So if you had a cane or needed a cane to get around, when you were out there walking around in South Carolina, they didn't want to see no slave walking on a cane. All right, I'm not going to go over the Brazilian code because we're not in Brazil and that's kind of irrelevant for us. But I just wanted you to see how ridiculous many of these slave codes are and how many of them do relate to how we get treated by cops, the justice system, and by white folks in general today. Now, after we left the plantation, we immediately all became criminals. This is why many of them will say to you, Black people are the most violent. That comes from the slave codes. Okay, so once we left the plantation, we all became criminals. And there's a reason why they keep telling Black people we're violent, we're criminals, we're causing all the problems and blah. It's a reason why they're telling you that. It all originates from these slave codes. I mean, you can actually, if you really listen to the way they talk about Black people, you can actually track in the history where it all began. And they've just been passing it down through the generations. Just understand, they've been saying that for centuries. They didn't just start saying that to Black people now. They were saying all of this shit during chattel slavery, the same thing. Just like go back to Africa. I actually went into some a documentary, like I would say like around 2010, and it had right in there, written back in the 1800s, go back to Africa. So these people don't make up nothing new because they're not that original. Come on. They just keep passing the same sayings and garbage down through the generations. Now, one of the laws that they pushed heavily was vagrancy laws. Why? Because it really could be for anything. You could literally be standing out in public. Some white person walks up to you, calls you a vagrant, you go to jail. A Black person could be looking for work. White person walks up, said, you're a vagrant. I mean, it was that easy for them to do that. See, you got to look at the laws and understand why they came up with this kind of stuff because you weren't committing a lot of crimes. But one thing they did know, once the slaves walked off the plantation, They were unemployed. So if you did not have a job and you were unemployed, then you were vagrant and you went to jail. That was how they got us back into slavery. Soon as we left the plantations, prisons went up all over America. Their intent to put us back into slavery. In legal terminology, vagrancy refers to the offense of persons who are without visible means of support or domicile while able to work. So you're an able bodied person, you don't have a job. Because you are able to work, they can now jail you and put you to work through the convict lease program. States, laws, and municipal ordinances punishing vagrancy often also covered loitering. And how many times they're saying this to us even to this day. If you go back and listen to some of the people that had the cops called on them, especially if they were in a store, they would tell them, "You're loitering, you're loitering." It comes from this. They're even saying that to us to this very day. Okay. Associating with reputed criminals, prostitution, and drunkenness. The punishment is usually a fine or several months in jail. You know how much work they get out of you by then? A lot. But see, when they locked people up for vagrancy, they used to lock Black men up for years. That was a way of getting more free labor out of you for the next several years and then release you. Same thing they do to this day with the resisting arrest, but they never tell you why you're being arrested. You know, when I see that, I now in my head say kidnapping. That's a kidnapping. They're just trying to legalize the kidnapping by saying resisting arrest. But they are really still doing the same kind of kidnapping that their forefathers did. It's really no different. You know, how do you get away with criminal acts? You write laws saying that what you're doing is not criminal, but actually it really is. The punishment is usually a fine or several months in jail. Instead of arresting vagrants, local officials often attempt to induce them to move on, but they don't do that with us. They call the police, and sometimes those stupid ass cop will show up and just like the guy that was picking up trash in front of his yard, make a big deal out of nothing, draw guns on somebody. That's the kind of acts we see them doing. Vagrants are often transient persons who move from place to place and don't remain in any one place for a significant length of time. Lawmakers have claimed that these laws are necessary to preserve the public order, but critics claim that they are just a way for economically and politically powerful people to exert control over the lower classes. Doesn't that sound familiar? Vagrancy laws are not necessary, y'all. They never were. They were never necessary. They just had to come up with any kind of way, any reason to justify getting you back in a situation where you were working for free. That's all that whole vagrancy thing really truly is. Recently, homeless people have gained some political clout through groups advocating on their behalf. Vagrancy laws have come under constitutional attack since being poor is not a crime under the Constitution. Well, I mean, that's true, but they don't care nothing. The cops, when they walk up to you and arrest you and just scream resisting arrest, That's a violation of your constitutional rights, and they still do it anyway. Well, you know what, Christopher? Everything they have on, in their laws unoriginal. Okay, I can tell you that right now. You're right. It came out of England, and that's where most of these people came out of when they came here. They were the low class criminals, prostitutes. These people are just the offspring of criminals. That's all they are. And you can tell by the way they act. Now, we're going to step into modern times, y'all. And I just have a series of articles that I'm going to show you here. Now you have false confessions. Now, how do police get a false confession? They usually get one by picking up mainly Black men, and during an interrogation, they beat them. And we know we all heard these stories about people getting beat up in police stations or even killed. This is how they get false confessions. Mistaken witness, in other words, a mistaken identity. Many of these people are in jail because of mistaken identity. And I want you to keep in mind, juries in America are still predominantly white. And the Black man is the most exonerated man in America. So what does that tell you about white eyewitness? What does that tell you? They're bad eyewitnesses, always have been. But all of these arrests, ladies and gentlemen, are not mistakes. Sometimes they have an axe to grind. And so what they do is they plot to get you in jail. And we see this with R. Kelly. They could have got R. Kelly in jail a long time ago, y'all. A long time ago. But they sat on this for 25 years. 25 years. Okay, corrupt investigators. These are cops that will arrest the wrong person, know they got the wrong person, still charge that wrong person, put that wrong person in jail, and put them on trial and find them guilty. And it's not just investigators. Many of these prosecutors are corrupt like that as well. So many of you may remember this story actually came out. I remember this story in March of last year, where they had to do all of these exonerations. And I believe this was Michigan, and let 139 people go. I mean, that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Now, another way they have gotten our people caught up in their system is through bail. That has also been another weapon used against the Black community. They know many of these poor people cannot bail out of their system. They can't do it. So many of them will spend sometimes years in jail because they simply can't bail out. And they know this. They know this when they are in Black neighborhoods picking up young people, and they know these folks are living in poor conditions and they can't afford these high bails. And that's been another corrupt way they have been able to hold us hostage in their prison system, in their court system. Okay. So I do agree with this article where you can't even end mass incarceration unless you end all of this money bail. But because America's God is money, they know the system is corrupt and it's just garbage, but they like the system this way because they are making huge profits off of it. They don't care as long as it's not them suffering through the system and it's just us. As long as it's just the black community, they don't give a damn. And if you notice, again, like I said to you before, every time Congress push any type of bill, it's always more protection for the cops. They have never pushed any bills that protects the black community. What's the reason? Slave codes that are still being carried out to this day. The slave is never protected. They can come and punish you and kill you and put you in jail anytime because you are still a slave. But you will have coons telling you, like Candace Owens, talking about racism is over. Somebody need to get a brick and knock her out for saying something that's stupid. But this is the nonsense she's going around saying, but we know the system was built on racism. If you got a criminal justice system that was built from day one on racism, then how is it going to be right now? Okay? There is no reforming this system. There's no reforming it. The system must go. You can't put a band-aid on this and keep going. It's got to go. Plain and simple. Now, let me show you how bad it is in the system. Now, I used to talk all that stuff before I knew any better. I used to say, oh, well, if you didn't do the crime, then you don't, then you shouldn't be worried about being in jail. The people in jail deserve to be in jail. No, they don't. No, they don't. The majority of people in jail do not deserve to be there, ladies and gentlemen. When I finally woke up enough to realize this, that's when I start backing off and start looking a little closer. And I was horrified by what I found. But no, I never, ever will say our people deserve to be in jail. And I won't say it for this reason. 70% of the people jailed in America have never been convicted of a crime. So, as far as I'm concerned, these cops literally kidnapped you off of the street, jailed you, and then you never ever had a day in court. Now they'll say, "Oh, well, X amount of time you supposed to go to trial." No, they don't. Many of these folks are in jail for 7, 8, 9, 10 years and never see inside of a courtroom, y'all. Never see inside of a courtroom. So now you have local jails, 630,000 are in local jails, 443,000 not convicted. So these people have been charged by a police officer, but they have never been inside of a courtroom. This is what they do to our people. And mainstream media will never talk about this because they are in on our destruction. They will never tell the truth. of how so many people, the majority, are in jail without ever being convicted, ever going before a jury, a judge, nothing, nothing, just sitting there indefinitely. So when they come around you talking about black people are most violent, black people go to jail more than everybody else. Yes, because you rigged up the system to be that way. And the mainstream media in America helps by always demonizing the black man in this country. So they uphold this stuff and they are very responsible for why the prison situation looked the way that it does. Everybody is not out here committing crimes. Ladies and gentlemen, they are not convicted because they are in there for bogus reasons in the first place. See, they'll do this to our people, but they won't touch an opioid addict and throw them in jail. And that's really where they belong. They won't do that to them. But if some black 14-year-old is just walking along minding his business, some cop come rolling up, jumps out of car, throw him down on the ground, resisting arrest, throw him in the back of the squad car, and now he's part of the system. So I just want you to see how bad it really is. This is a report that was done by Prison Policy Initiative in 2017. And they concluded that 70% of the people in jail were never convicted of any crime at all. Only 30% of the prison population are convicted of a crime. But these folks are sitting in our faces talking about let the system work. Let the system work. The system has never worked for us. That's a bullshit statement. It never worked for us. Now, in the state of Georgia, I have a lot of relatives there. This came out in 2018, February 21st. The majority of Georgians in jail because they can't pay bail. Not because they can't, they really did the crime or anything. They literally cannot bail themselves out. So we don't have to go all the way back to the past to see the wrong that have been done to us, ladies and gentlemen. We can see plenty wrong going on to this day. So, in the state of Georgia, 64% of the prison population cannot make bail. And see, it's not always about reparations. They have to correct this shit, y'all. Yes, we want our check. Absolutely. We damn right we want it. But we need them to correct all of the wrongs that have been done to our people, even the ones behind bars. Hmm. Okay. So, I mean, this is crazy what's going on today when you really look at the system. You know, this is one thing I've been trying to draw attention periodically to people about how bad this really is. If you listen to them, they're running a good system. It's fair. They're giving everybody the same kind of treatment, and it's not true. It's never been true. Okay. If that's the case, where's the white codes? Where's the Hispanic codes? Where's the Asian codes? No, everybody is not being treated the same in this system at all. Okay. Bail burdens keeps US jails stuffed with inmates. This is how the jails are becoming overcrowded, y'all. Okay, so it's becoming overcrowded because people are not being convicted that are in there. Then they're cramming all of these other people in there that can't make bail. And you have the inmates that are convicted all piled on top of each other. And the conditions in those jails are deplorable. It is bad, y'all. It is hideous inside of the jails. I was looking at some of the pictures. It is disgusting. Some of the toilets don't flush. They had an incident up in New York where when the polar vortex happened, the jail had no heat. Can you imagine being an inmate in a jail and the jail has no heat? And it's like -9 outside and it feels that way inside, and you can hardly keep yourself warm. But that's what they do to these men and women today. I remember another case that came out last year. You guys could probably look this up. There was a woman that went to jail, and it was over something minor. I can't remember right off the top of my head. She really shouldn't have been in jail. When she was put in jail, she was menstruating. She was asking for pads, right? They wouldn't give her pads. So by the time her case came up, she appeared in court before the judge with no pants on. They sent her like that to court from the jails. Now you just picture that in your head. They wouldn't give her nothing, no pad, no nothing. And then she went before the judge with no pants on. And even the judge was like, why is this woman in my court with no pants on? She lit no panties. Her vajayjay was out. Okay. She had nothing on. And the prisons, the correction officers walked her into the courtroom looking like that. You know, it's disgusting what they do. And see, they know they can get away with doing this. Remember, according to the 13th Amendment, you have no rights. You're back at a slave status when you go to jail in America. But this is how we're treated. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to place this on the pile of injustices that were done to the Black community on the ADOS list. So, this will be there too. So this concludes the hangout for today. This time I was going to do this one alone. Perhaps the next time, I will have a panel. But I thank each and every one of you for coming to this hangout. And also, try to frequent the 24/7 live stream. You don't have to stay on there long. If you can spare up to a half hour or maybe longer of your life of just turning it on and listening to some of the old throwback videos. Some of the videos on there are 2 years old. I can't believe I've been on YouTube for 2 years now. And just pop in frequently. It's kind of counterproductive if I have a 24/7 live stream and three people are only listening. So just pop in there periodically, turn it on, listen to it, and enjoy. Some of the videos are still relevant, believe it or not, to this day. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Mhm. All right. Wherever you are, enjoy the rest of your day and get plenty of rest before you have to go back to work tomorrow because, we all lost an hour. Peace, family.